Forbidden knowledge is something that we as Christians have to be wary about throughout our lifetimes, but the Bible is the only source of knowledge we can trust, as it has been ordained by God to be His Word. Many books did not make it to the final version of the Gospel as we know it today, and one of those books is the controversial Gospel of Mary. This book is considered to be apocryphal in nature. While a large section of the public shuns this book, there are many which state that this book contains essential knowledge about the life of Christ. If that is so, then why was the Gospel of Mary banned by the Church? Is there truly something forbidden in this Gospel that we should not know? Let's find out together. Firstly, it's important to understand which Mary of the Bible is responsible for this Gospel. The New Testament mainly talks of two Marys. The first is Mary, the mother of Jesus, and then we have Mary Magdalene, one of Jesus' closest disciples and trusted followers. The Gospel of Mary originated with the latter, who was the first person to witness the resurrection of Christ and was also one of the earliest disciples of Christ. The word gospel is a recollection of the message of Christ via the eyes of one of his trusted followers. Canonically, it was decided by the council that convened at Nicaea that there were only 4 Gospels that could be taken as canon. We know these 4 Gospels as Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John today, with each Gospel showing a unique perspective on Christ and his message. While the message of salvation is untainted and pure across the 4 Gospels, we get various perspectives on who Christ was and the different things he did during his lifetime. The Gospel of Mary was discovered much later, and it was found that the text was authored by someone unknown. It was understood that books like the Gospel of Mary posed a serious problem within the Christian circles of the time, because of the strong patriarchal norms that were established during that time. The story of Mary Magdalene and her Gospel is one that was highly controversial during its time, as it didn't talk about the Gospel the way Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John did, thus challenging the narrative that had been taken as canon. The result of all these factors coalescing together was that the Gospel of Mary was shunned and banished as it was seen as a heretical and blasphemous piece of work. Furthermore, the Gospel of Mary was not even heard of during the time of the Nicene Creed and was only discovered in 1896 in a 5th century Coptic codex known as the Berlin Codex. The text was authored in Coptic, but experts believe that the original text would have actually been in Greek, owing to the fact that Coptic script was dated back to the 5th century. The Gospel according to Mary was considered largely heretical during the time it was discovered due to the fact that presented highly Gnostic views, which were opposed to the rigid structure that other members of the Church introduced. Furthermore, this text portrayed Mary Magdalene as being closer to Jesus than any of the male disciples ever were. She was shown to have had a much deeper understanding of the teachings of Jesus than any of the male apostles, which challenged the narrative that had been built up till this point, which was that Peter and the rest of the male disciples being the primary leaders. We can understand why the Gospel of Mary was so controversial by looking at the content of the text. It opens with a dialogue between Mary and the risen Jesus, where he imparts secret teachings to Mary, which end up opening her mind. The problem is that these teachings were not aligned with what Jesus said before his resurrection. He talked about how salvation actually comes from within, and that it does not come from anything external, like the practice of rituals and laws. After Jesus' departure into the heavens, the disciples remain very scared as they are left without a leader. But Mary steps up and comforts the disciples and tells them that she has received new information from Jesus himself in a direct vision. In this vision, she was shown the ascent of the soul via various realms and how it has to overcome various archons or cosmic powers that try to obstruct the soul's journey into the afterlife. We can see how these ideas go completely against the canon idea of the Gospel, and how it starts deviating into the realm of the Gnostic and spiritualistic. Even if this text was known to the early church fathers, they probably understood that this text was fundamentally problematic in nature because of the fact that it deviated from the core message of Christ's salvation and sacrifice on the cross at Calvary. This text also contains a moment of strife between Mary and the disciples, specifically Peter. who questions Mary and why she would be favored over the others to receive all the special spiritual teachings from Jesus. Mary responds to them calmly and is also backed by another disciple named Levi, who assured the disciples that Mary was worthy enough to receive such an instruction from God. This moment in this text also highlights the struggle for authority, leadership, and the role of women in the early church. The Gospel of Mary, as we know it today, did not survive completely, as the text that was found were only fragments of the entire text. When other Greek texts were discovered that linked back to the Gospel of Mary, it was understood by scholars that the origins and influence of this text were understated. It's understood now that there was a strong crowd of believers who took this apocryphal text as canon. The largest hurdle in adopting this text came due to the fact that no one knew who authored the book, which left the intent and identity of the writer in the dark. Was it perhaps authored by someone related to Mary Magdalene? Or perhaps could it have been written by her itself? Mary in the Bible is certainly given an important position, but we can see that there isn't much exposition as to who she was and where she came from. Nonetheless, we can see Mary being present at many an important moment in the Bible, like the crucifixion of Jesus, the laying of his body in the tomb, and witnessing his resurrection. She was blessed to be the very first witness to the resurrection and was tasked by Christ himself to spread the message to the disciples that he had risen. The canonical Gospels show us that Mary was a devoted follower of Christ and that her origins are truly miraculous. If we look into the Gospel according to Luke chapter 8, we can see this being said about Mary. And also some women who had been cured of evil spirits and diseases. Mary, called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had come out. Mary was a woman who didn't just decide to follow Jesus because of his teachings. She is someone who had a very miraculous encounter with Christ that prompted her to become his devoted follower, from being in a position where she was being tortured by 7 demons every day. She was elevated to the status of a follower of Christ, truly a miraculous turnaround. Mary was one of the few women who were personally called by Christ to serve in his ministry, and was present throughout the entirety of his time on his planet. We can see how Mary's devotion particularly shines through in John chapter 20, wherein we see the disciples along with Mary gathering at the tomb of Christ to witness that it was truly empty. Now Mary stood outside the tomb crying. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb and saw 2 angels in white, seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. They asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" "They have taken my Lord away," she said, "and I don't know where they have put him." At this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not realize that it was Jesus. He asked her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it you are looking for?" Thinking he was the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned toward him and cried out in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus said, "Do not hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene went to the disciples with the news, "I have seen the Lord," and she told them that he had said these things to her. We can see that the role of Mary was anything but insignificant. She had greater faith in her Lord than any of the other disciples, and as such, was rewarded by Christ with being the first witness to the resurrection, and was tasked with carrying the good news to the other disciples as well. We can understand from this passage in the Bible that Mary played a big role in the story of Christ and his resurrection. Mary's role, although hinted at being significant in the canonical Gospels, is further elaborated on in the Gospel of Mary. The Gospel of Mary talks about salvation in a manner that hasn't been explored before. We can see in this manuscript that when the disciples were troubled, it was Mary who comforted them and made them calm by recounting the teachings that were imparted to her by Christ through her vision. We can see that Christ had entrusted her with the commandment to not lay down any rules beyond what I've given you, nor make a law like the lawgiver, lest you be bound by it. The Gospel, according to Mary, remains one of the most esoteric texts in existence. Its content, combined with the prolific biblical character it is associated with, makes us wonder whether we should truly consider this Gospel as canon. But we can understand that this text did not make it to the final cut of the Bible due to the fact that it goes completely against the original teachings of Christ, and there is no solid backing to support the fact that this was indeed written by Mary Magdalene or someone close to her. Nonetheless, let us hope that the truth will be revealed in time as to the true purpose and nature of this text.